Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Golden Key Design. On today's episode, we'll be taking this old dingy laundry room that definitely needs an update from this to this. Stay tuned to see how he did it. So as you saw, this laundry room was definitely in need of an update. It had an old washer and dryer and wire shelves everywhere. I started by pulling out the washer and dryer, and this is what I saw. I know I had a lot of work ahead of me. I started by pulling out all of the old wire shelves and patching those holes, and then gave everything a nice new coat of paint. I then tore out the floor and continued the vinyl plank flooring from everywhere else in the place. You can watch that video up in the right hand corner. Then it was time to start framing out the support for the countertop to go over top of the washer and dryer. Here you can see I'm screwing in some 2x4s into the studs of the wall, basically forming a perimeter that I can lay the countertop on top of. And since I'll be using a butcherblock countertop, which is quite heavy, I decided to add an additional middle support brace in between the washer and dryer so there wouldn't be any sag in the countertop in the middle. And make sure you leave room for your water lines and any electrical cords that might be sticking up through the counter. Next up is installing the upper cabinet, and since it's just me today, I'll be using this 2x4 to help me prop the cabinet on top of so I can screw it in properly. So there I was just marking out where the studs were and making sure that the line was level, and here I'm screwing in that 2x4 basically as a ledger board for me to put the cabinet on top of while I screw it in. Now this next step isn't completely necessary, but I decided to pre-drill all the holes for my screws that I'll be using to mount the cabinet to the wall. And if you're enjoying the video so far, please check out our TikTok and Instagram as we have even more DIY content over there. Now back to the video. Here you can see that ledger board in action. This is extremely helpful when mounting upper cabinets by yourself. And I also decided to pre-drill the holes in the wall as well, so I just tap each screw to give me a mark, and then take off the cabinet and drill into those marks that I just made. And like I mentioned before, this pre-drilling step isn't completely necessary, but since I was using some pretty large screws, I decided that pre-drilling was just a safer option. And I take off that ledger board, and it's good to go. I then came back to determine what the heights of this shelf should all be, and since this is a laundry room, the laundry detergent goes on the first shelf and it's quite high, so I made it a pretty high shelf, and then gave everything a good vacuuming, and then it was on to installing the door. And I bought this cabinet with the door already installed, but I took it off when installing the cabinet just to make it a little bit lighter, and then I made sure that the door opened properly, but sometimes you might need to put a spacer on the left edge so that the door can fully open. Then it was on to installing the door hardware. I had some left over from my kitchen, so I just used one of those. And here you can see I put tape on both the back and front edge, and therefore this prevents a lot of blowout and tear out of the door, and just makes the hole really nice and clean. Then I made a pit stop to Target and found this awesome wallpaper with Bianca. It's this really cool navy blue with some gold to tie in that hardware. I think it looks really nice, and we put those seams exactly where the shelves will end up going. And I really wanted to hide this dryer vent, and so I thought it would be best to push up into this corner, and so I used some blocks and brad nails to hold it in place, and as you'll see, this will kind of create a box that I can put the vent into. I then moved on to cutting the butcherblock countertop. I bought this slab from Home Depot. It was about a little over $200 I think, but it's very high quality and very large, and I just needed to cut this down to size so we could fit it in. And I ended up using my offcuts for creating some cutting boards for friends and family, so making sure to recycle and reuse. I then used the jigsaw to cut some holes in the countertop to make room for the water lines and electrical cords. The butcher block came pretty well sanded, but I came back with some 220 grit sandpaper to get it extra smooth. Now this thing is quite cumbersome, but I was able to bring it inside on some sawhorses and work in some nice AC. And here I'm just opening up the stain and picking a spot that's a little bit less conspicuous so I can test the stain to make sure I like it, and I ended up very much liking it, and so I went on and continued. I actually used the underside of the butcher block to test out a couple different stains, and this was the one I ended up going with. The others were a bit lighter, but I really preferred this darker stain that went with the darker navy and gold. I think it looked the best. Then after the stain was dry, it was onto polyurethane. I ended up trying this new Varathane product, which is an extra thick polyurethane that basically in one application you're able to get 3 coats of normal polyurethane on. And it was a little bit more difficult to apply, a little bit thicker, but in the end it really worked out nicely and I was very happy with the product. And it goes on a little bit glossy, but it'll dry it with a matte finish. And then while we wait for that to dry, I came back to box in that dryer vent, and here you can see how I was able to use those blocks basically as nailing blocks to install these boards to kind of cover up that vent and get it out of sight as best I possibly could. I then covered up that lower seam with the first shelf, lining it up with the cabinet so it kind of looked as one built-in, and then it was on to installing the middle shelf. And here I mainly used a friction fit, but then came back with some pocket screws from above so you wouldn't see them to give it some more rigidity. And this middle shelf is covering up that middle seam, as you can see, and so the wallpaper application was actually a lot easier knowing that these seams would end up being covered by these shelves, so it's always best to plan ahead. I then came back with some 1x2s to cover up that plywood edge as well as give the shelf some more thickness. The final step was adding in this upper shelf, and it's not exactly a shelf, but it's aligned with the upper edge of the cabinet to give this whole system more of a built-in look. Then after some persuasion, we were finally able to get this countertop in, and I think it looks really nice, really happy with that stain color. So now let's take a look at what the laundry room used to look like. An old washer and dryer and tons of wire shelves, yet very little usable storage, and it needed an update real bad. So now let's see what it looks like now. So happy with the way this project turned out honestly better than expected, and off camera I added some baseboard and crown molding to really finish off the look. Comment down below what your favorite part was, and also if you want to see even more DIY projects, we post a new one every Saturday and there's tons more on our channel, so go and take a look. And as always, thanks for watching and happy building. See you next time.